our worldview starts to be determined by the assumptions that we make. Our assumptions are made based on our past experiences as well as based on what other people tell us or what we are taught. Our assumptions help us to make sense of the world in a way, and they can be very useful. But when it comes to healing from chronic symptoms, they can be one of the main factors keeping you stuck from healing. This is what I'm going to be dealing with in this video. I'm going to show you how your assumptions might be making your symptoms persist and how you can work with these assumptions to change them, set different assumptions in order to break free of chronic symptoms. So let's get started. Depending on the relationship and view we have of our body, we automatically make a lot of assumptions every day. So most people who are healthy, they assume that they're going to be okay most days. They assume that if they get sick, they're going to get better. And these assumptions actually help them stay better and help them get better when they get sick. When we have chronic symptoms, most of the time there would be certain underlying assumptions that we're making on a daily basis that are not helping us. And as we grow older, we accumulate more and more of these assumptions. For example, we might assume that because we've gotten injured in the past in a certain area of the body, then that area is going to be vulnerable or prone to re-injury. That's an assumption. We might assume that every morning we're going to wake up with pain. We're going to assume that certain activities are going to cause pain. Sometimes assumptions can be so subtle and so insidious that we don't even have a thought. We don't even register a thought like, oh, if I do that, I'm going to be in pain. But actually the assumption takes place at a deeper level, so to speak. And we are just kind of making the association, making the assumption automatically when we think about something that we're doing. So we might be planning an activity and we don't have the thought of, oh, this might cause pain, but on a deeper level, we might already be making that assumption, almost on an unconscious level. And sometimes assumptions can be displayed through our behavior, through the way we approach something, through the way we approach our daily life, actually. So someone with chronic pain will have certain assumptions of how the body is prone to respond to certain situations. Because of these assumptions, this person might be more hypervigilant. In fact, hypervigilance is a result of making an assumption that maybe our body is vulnerable or broken. So this person might be behaving with a lot of caution. He might be checking in with his pain area all the time. Every time he's doing an activity that might trigger the pain, he's going to be super focused on that area because of his assumption that it is prone to creating pain, to be in pain. If you tell me, but I don't constantly think, that I'm going to have pain, it just comes up during an activity or after, it might be that you are having this underlying assumption. Because we don't always recognize these assumptions as clear-cut thoughts, we have to work consciously on changing them and negating them through our behavior. Okay, because our behavior can send different messages to the brain and can start to change our previously held beliefs and assumptions. So to give you a little bit of an example from my own personal life, over the years I have suffered, for many years actually, I suffered from non-allergic rhinitis, which is like an allergy, but it's kind of a little bit more random and it tends to flare up for people when the weather changes, when it's colder, maybe more humid. It can be very violent and very debilitating. Sometimes I would kind of start sneezing as soon as I wake up. I would have a runny nose all day, like uncontrollably. And of course, because I had this, I started to make various assumptions. So I would wake up and I would notice that I was almost checking in with my nose and feeling for that feeling of irritation, which had been so familiar to me. So this irritation over here in my case. And it's as if by checking in with that, I was making the assumption that maybe I'm going to get that attack of rhinitis again. Unfortunately, when I did this, more likely than not, I would start sneezing. I would get the rhinitis because my brain would make the connection, that assumption helped my brain to remember the symptom, and therefore it would keep happening over and over and over. So what did I do to get rid of that eventually? What I did was, first of all, I established that it was a mind-body symptom. There was for sure a mind-body connection, because my symptom didn't make sense otherwise. There was no specific allergen, and even if there were, allergens are often triggers. Secondly, I started to ask myself, what could be the behaviors that are reinforcing this assumption and therefore leading to the symptom each time? And I started to notice, as I said before, that when I was waking up, I was tuning in too much to this area. I was twitching my nose a little bit too much. I was trying to take deeper breaths to make sure that I got rid of any blockage, and that was actually making it worse. In a nutshell, I was behaving as if I had a problem. I was behaving in a way that confirmed to me that I have this problem. So this assumption was getting confirmed over and over. What I needed to do eventually was to start to disengage from these behaviors bit by bit. So I would wake up and not immediately focus on my nose. And even if I did feel some sort of irritating sensation, I would not make predictions about it. I would maybe just observe it for a second and attempt to refocus, attempt to behave as if I did not have this problem. Now, this can be a little bit tricky when you have symptoms, but it's for sure the fastest way to heal is to adopt the assumption of someone who does not have your chronic symptoms. So questions I like to ask myself is, how would someone without these symptoms behave? How would he approach certain activities? How would he go about his day-to-day? And I would attempt to mimic that behavior, right? And to adopt those assumptions. One of the best ways, of course, to do this is to reduce the focus and hypervigilance on your own symptoms, because a person who does not have your problem would not be constantly checking in for the pain or monitoring the area or trying to do all sorts of things to prevent the symptom from occurring. So this is what I mean when I say try to adopt the modes of behavior, the thinking patterns and assumptions of someone who is symptom-free, because that's how you're going to more quickly change and reprogram your brain. How would you approach life if you assumed that you were going to be okay? What would you be thinking about in the morning? What would you be doing first thing in the morning if you assumed that everything would be okay? How would you go to sleep? How would you approach your physical activities or workout if you assumed that everything was going to be okay, if you assumed that your body can be trusted? Because assumptions can breed a lot of mistrust in our body. If we assume we're prone to re-injuring ourselves, if we assume that something is too much for our body, right? If we assume that a certain condition that's external to us, like temperature, weather, or whatever, is going to affect us, then it is. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you can do a lot of things, in the mind-body space. Definitely, they can be useful, like releasing emotions, working with your emotions. But unless you actually identify these assumptions, question them, and change them, then maybe your progress can be a little bit limited, or you can hit a stumbling block. So if you really sit with yourself and ask yourself the question, like, what am I assuming about my symptoms, about how my body is going to behave? And probably you're going to get some answers. You're going to be like, oh yeah, I'm assuming that this activity is going to cause some low-level pain. Oh, I'm assuming that I will always have a symptom somehow. A lot of people have been in pain for a long time. This assumption becomes second nature for them, right? And you start to question this assumption, like, okay, so how would I behave and think if I assumed I was going to be okay, right? And then you might get some ideas. You might actually realize, oh, then I would be walking with more ease or doing this activity with much more ease. And that's how you have to act in the present day with more ease, based on the assumption that you're going to be okay. And that's going to affect the way you move, most likely. It's going to affect many things, the way you think, the way you approach certain activities, the predictions you're going to make. So it's going to affect everything. Remember, your assumptions are based on old programmed beliefs most of the time. They help you make sense of the world, but sometimes they can help you form a very limited view of the world. And we misinterpret that view, that picture, as the truth, when really it isn't. It is the reality that is based on our assumption. So if we get rid of that underlying assumption and we assume that things can be different, that's when we start to introduce a new possibility, and that's when we start to train our brain to expect something different. And because our brain is so powerful and our imagination can help us so much in healing, that's when we can start to see changes, because now we can start to expect and visualize a different outcome. And as we start to expect and visualize a different outcome over and over again, then that is more likely going to become our new reality. I almost wanted to say that assumptions are everything when it comes to healing chronic symptoms. Well, they are a huge chunk of it, I would say, still. Of course, they're not everything, because there are other things you might need to work on in your personal life. That's something that I deal with separately in my programs, in my book, and in other videos. But they are a huge chunk of it. They are something that many people might be missing out on as they're doing the rest of the work. These subtle little assumptions leading to certain expectations that are actually preventing them from moving forward. This is why I created this video, to get you to think a little bit about this and to hopefully assist you a little bit more on your journey. So that's all from me for today. I hope that this video has been helpful. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.